Most people think remarriage after 60 is a happy ending. They picture companionship, someone to sit across the table at dinner, someone to travel with, someone who fills the quiet spaces in the house again. But what they rarely talk about is how complicated it becomes when two full lives try to merge that late in life. My name is Margaret. I'm 74 years old, and a few years ago I came very close to marrying again. At the time, it seemed like the natural next step in life. Now, looking back, I realize it would have changed far more than I understood then. I was married once before for over 40 years. We met when I was 23 and he was 26. Two young people who believed they understood the world simply because we were excited about the future. We didn't have much money when we started. Our wedding was small, held in a modest church with a reception in the community hall downstairs. Folding chairs, homemade food, relatives laughing too loudly, and a borrowed record player in the corner. But when you're young, that's enough. Marriage at that age isn't about comfort yet. It's about building something together. And that's what we did for decades. We built a house in the suburbs. We raised 2 children. We learned how to stretch a paycheck and how to forgive each other after arguments about things that seemed important at the time. Some years were easier than others. There were seasons when money felt tight, when work was stressful, when we disagreed about how to handle things with the kids. But through all of it, we understood each other in a way that only happens after many years side by side. Eventually, our children grew up and started families of their own. The house became quieter, but it still felt full of life. Sunday dinners, grandchildren visiting, holiday decorations coming out of the attic every winter. Then, about 9 years ago, my life changed. My husband's health began to decline slowly. At first, it was small things, less energy, more doctor appointments. Eventually, our routines shifted entirely, and one day, the house became quiet in a way I had never experienced before. Not empty exactly, just different. The furniture was the same. The photographs on the hallway wall were the same, but the feeling inside the house had changed. Anyone who has lived with someone for decades understands this. Silence feels heavier when you're not used to hearing it. For the first year, I mostly focused on routines. Morning coffee at the same kitchen table, grocery shopping on Thursdays, phone calls with my daughter in the evenings. My son visited on Sundays with his wife and their boys. They tried to keep me busy, and I appreciated that more than they probably realized. But rebuilding a life after such a long marriage takes time. Eventually, friends started saying the same thing. "You're still young. You shouldn't spend the rest of your life alone." I didn't argue with them, but the idea always made me uneasy. Not because I believed love could only happen once, but because when you've already shared 40 years with someone, the idea of starting from the beginning again feels very different. Still, life has a way of moving forward, whether we expect it to or not. About 2 years later, I began volunteering twice a week at the local community center. It was nothing dramatic. Helping organize donations, serving lunches, talking with people who came in regularly. But it gave me a reason to leave the house and talk to others again. That's where I met Thomas. Thomas was 76, a retired accountant who had also spent most of his life married. He was calm, thoughtful, and the kind of person who listened carefully before speaking. At first, our conversations were simple. Complaints about the weak coffee at the center, observations about the weather, little stories about our grandchildren. But slowly, those conversations became longer. We talked about our families, our past careers, the strange adjustments that come with getting older. There's a quiet understanding between people who have lived long lives. Many things don't need long explanations. After a few months, we started meeting outside the center. Coffee once a week, walks in the park, occasional dinners at a small Italian restaurant not far from my house. It was comfortable, calm, predictable. At our age, predictability feels better than excitement. My children noticed before I said anything. One evening, my daughter asked gently, "Mom, are you seeing someone?" I told her yes. She smiled and said something that surprised me. "Well, when do we get to meet him?" Until that moment, I hadn't really thought about the future of the relationship. To me, it had simply been companionship. Two people keeping each other company during a quieter chapter of life. But to others, companionship often means something more. A few months later, Thomas brought the subject up himself. We were sitting on a park bench one afternoon while families walked along the path nearby. He looked at me thoughtfully and said, "Have you ever considered getting married again?" I remember feeling both honored and uncertain at the same time. Marriage at 25 is about building a future. Marriage at 74 is about merging two entire paths, and those paths are rarely simple. Thomas had 2 adult children. I had 2 of my own. Between us, there were grandchildren, homes, savings accounts, and decades of family expectations. For a while, I truly considered the idea. Another shared home. Another person sitting across the table each morning. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something people rarely say out loud. Remarriage later in life doesn't just connect 2 people. It connects families, finances, histories, and responsibilities. One evening, my son said something very honest. "Mom, we just want everything to stay simple." Simple. That word stayed in my mind for days, because marriage rarely makes things simple when 2 long lives are involved. Eventually, I had to ask myself one difficult question. Was I thinking about marriage because I truly wanted it, or because people assume being alone is something that must be fixed? It took time before I answered honestly, and when I finally did, the answer surprised even me. I realized I didn't want another marriage. What I wanted was peace. Peace in the home my husband and I built together. Peace in the routines I had slowly rebuilt. Peace in the relationships with my children and grandchildren. Thomas was a good man. I cared about him deeply. But caring about someone and marrying them are not always the same decision. Sometimes the wisest choice later in life isn't starting over. Sometimes the wisest choice is protecting the life you already built. At 74, I've learned that companionship can take many forms. It can be a long conversation over coffee, a walk in the afternoon sun, a phone call with your children, or laughter with old friends. Marriage isn't the only path to connection. What matters most now is peace, honesty, and living the years you have left in a way that feels true to you.